today's webinar, Extortionists, Exfiltrators, and Hacktivists. I'm your moderator, James Baker, Managing Partner of the Public Sector Technology Exchange. I want to thank you from all over America for joining us today for what I believe is going to be a very riveting and thought-provoking discussion. The Public Sector Technology Exchange is an independent forum that discusses the technology challenges impacting government, industry, and the citizen. You can learn more about us online or in your favorite social media venue. Before we begin today, there are a handful of things I want to go over. Today's webinar will be recorded, and you will get a YouTube link after the event where you can watch it again. I would kindly ask you, if you're listening in, to please mute your phone or computers. Your questions are very important to us. Over the last month, as we've been registering for this one, we've gotten a multitude of questions that have come in from federal, state, and local government, higher education, as well as the technology industry. We're going to try to get to as many of those as we can. You can also use the GoToWebinar dashboard feature and give us a question that we'll try to get to. In the event that we cannot get to your question, we'll make sure to follow up with you after the webinar. The last thing I would ask you, at the end of this webinar, there is going to be a survey. I would kindly ask you to take a few minutes to fill that out. It's very important to me, your feedback. I'd also like you to share not only what you thought about today's webinar and our speakers, but what you would like for future events. I'd now like to thank our sponsor. Today's webinar would not be possible without our sponsor, Akamai. Tom Ruff, Vice President of Public Sector Americas from Akamai, is going to say a few words. Tom.
Thank you, James. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm Tom Ruff, and as James mentioned, I'm the Vice President of Sales for Akamai Public Sector. I welcome everybody to this very exciting webinar, and it's certainly relevant to today's environment. Next slide, please. For those that might not be aware of Akamai, we are, in fact, a 15-year-old technology company, about $2 billion in size, and in the last year and a half, we've been growing at over 24%, which is pretty remarkable for a 15-year-old company. And a lot of that is largely attributed to the significant role that we play in security today. We're a highly decentralized computing platform. We're in over 110 countries, 190,000 servers in 1,400 of the most relevant networks that make up this environment called the Internet. Simply put, we accelerate the secure delivery of web content, rich media, IP web, and mobile content over the Internet. And we're very proud to say that our customers are pretty much who's who across almost every vertical. The top global e-commerce companies, where we drive $2 billion of secure credit card transactions a day. 97% of all top retailers leverage us. 90% of the social media companies leverage us. Most antivirus companies, and certainly all the major U.S. sports networks, use us for our HD streaming capabilities. Next slide, please. We have taken our technologies and have really become a trusted brand within governments globally. And that's at the federal, state, and local levels, and certainly across the universities. Next slide, please. Within the federal government alone, we are in 15 of the 15 cabinet-level agencies, accelerating over 4,000 applications. And that doesn't include what we do for the Department of Defense, where we accelerate over 1,000 applications inside the government's private network. Next slide, please. We're also very proud of our growing state and local and education marketplace. We have key states such as California, state of New York, Illinois, just to name a few. Our growing list of city and county governments, Orlando's using our full breadth of products, as well as other big cities such as Chicago. Educational institutions, that list continues to grow, and I'm going to pre-announce that we're about ready to be approved for security on the Internet 2 contract, if you're aware of that vehicle, which we're excited about. Also on the state level, if you take a look at the Healthcare HICS initiative, Akamai, whether it's in the federal data centers or working directly with the states, 85+% use us to leverage us for scalability and security. Next slide, please. And the reason why governments use us, You know, historically, it's been around availability, scalability, performance, and certainly visibility across the cloud. But the number one reason in the last 5 years has really been around security and our ability to be able to take our decentralized computing platform that's represented really in almost every major network in the world, and where Akamai's presence and infrastructure and compute power is no more than 90. We are no more than one hop away from 90% of the internet users in the world. So basically, we use this decentralized computing platform to push the perimeter of defense as far away from your hosting provider, from your data center, from your web infrastructure, and actually take on and start fighting the cyber war as far away from your data center as possible. This has a key attribute of being able to keep your mission up, not tax your infrastructure, and at the same time have Akamai handle at least 80% of the current web threats out at the edge where the end user is trying to come onto the network before it gets to your data center. So enjoy today's webinar, and we really look forward to hearing what the panelists have to say, and we appreciate the time to sponsor this opportunity. Back to you, James.
Thank you, Tom. And again, we appreciate everyone who's just joining us right now from all over the country. We're going to take a moment and have each of our esteemed panelists introduce themselves. As you can see from your screen, we have a lineup of state and local leaders, industry, as well as higher education. For each of the panelists, if you could just take a moment, we're going to start with Randell, and introduce yourself, as well as what your role is with your organization. Randell.
Well, good morning. My name is Randell Smith, and I happen to serve as both a Chief Information Security Officer and Chief Privacy Officer for the City of Phoenix. I've been with the city for about 9 years now, and my office basically is to provide coordination, direction, strategic oversight for city leadership to ensure that we have the right programs and procedures in place to protect the city. Prior to that, I actually served for around 30 years with the U.S. Navy in the field of cryptology. So I've been doing this field for many years. I'm passionate about information security and cybersecurity, and looking forward to this conference.
Thanks a lot, Randell. Bob, would you just take a few minutes and introduce yourself to our audience?
My name is Bob Woolley. I'm the Chief Technical Architect for the state of Utah. I have about 17 years of experience blending architecture, security, and practicality together, and that's been interesting. We tend to try and take a very careful look. We have so many different security requirements from federal and state and local partners that it can become complicated at times. We think we're making some real progress.
Thank you very much, Bob. Patrick, would you just take a moment to introduce yourself to our audience?
Yeah, good afternoon. This is Patrick Sullivan. I manage the security team here at Akamai, and you know, as Tom did a great job of kind of explaining how the platform works, you know, we have the privilege of protecting really sort of the top brands across a variety of verticals, and along with that, we get to see really in you know, a great deal of detail sort of the attack trends that are taking place, as well as kind of active incident response when there are new attacks, right? So. You know, we feel one of the more interesting jobs in the security industry today. I'm pleased to be on the panel today.
Thank you, Patrick. Jim, kindly take a few minutes to tell us about yourself.
Sorry, I have my mute on there, Jimmy. This is Jim Bates from state of Alaska. And my CISO was originally going to be doing this presentation, but he had another engagement, so I'm doing it. I've been at the state of Alaska for about 2.5 years. I'm the Director of Enterprise Technology Services, serve as our CIO for the state. And we at ETS do data center operations facilities, database administration, enterprise applications, the wireless, all the infrastructure services, including our wide area network, our over 16,000 voice over IP phone system, all the email, mainframe services. Security office reports to me as well, our state CISO, so that's me.
Thank you, Jim. Samantha.
Good morning, this is Samantha. I am currently the Chief Privacy Officer for California Correctional Healthcare Services under the receivership.
All righty, thank you, Samantha.
We have a lot of smoky fires here in Northern California.
Boy, That's for sure. And Samantha is going to have some great insight to some of the questions, but the receivership is a really unique thing here to the state of California and some of the work we're doing. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. Our next speaker is all the way from San Luis Obispo, Bill Britton. Bill, kindly introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you very much there. Yes, now in San Luis Obispo, career Air Force as opposed to Randell, but worked in the fields of intelligence and electronic warfare. So started off before they used to call this cyber or information assurance or all the other words they now call it. Did that for 20 years. Worked with every four-letter agency in the D.C. and surrounding world. As a matter of fact, then retired and became what we call a Beltway Patriot, which is also known as a contractor supporting government establishment, and worked for other different three-letter organizations as a result of that. Was volunteered by the CEO at the company I was working with, Parsons Corporation, to do a sabbatical to CalPoly to help run and establish the cybersecurity center here, and have really been working with that, and then working to support several state task force and agencies in their development to the future solutions for cybersecurity. And thanks for having us today.
You are very welcome. Glad you're here. Victor.
Oh, hello, Jimmy. This is Victor Chakravarty. I am the enterprise architect of the Maine Office of Information Technology, and I oversee architecture, security, and policy for the Maine State Executive Branch. One of the things that we are really proud of in Maine is we have this synergy amongst architecture, security, and policy, because we believe that strong security can be accomplished only by baking security in the architecture and enforcing it through policy. I have been in this business 26 years, about half and half. I was in Silicon Valley, California many, many years, and then the state of Maine now, and I really look forward to this webinar.
Well, hold tight there, Victor, because you're going to be the first person we're going to ask some questions of. And for everyone who's just joining in, I can still see we're having a lot of people coming in throughout the country. We're now at the part of our program where I'm going to be interviewing all of our panelists. I have a few questions that I want to ask them as it relates to security and hacker groups. We're going to begin that portion, and then if you all, the audience listening in, can start preparing your questions and sending them in through the dashboard, as well as we have some of the questions that have come on online, we'll open it up to you, the audience, to interact with our panelists. Victor is the enterprise architect for the Office of Information Technology from the state of Maine. Victor, my first question for you today is that your Attorney General has a dedicated page for privacy, identity, and data security breaches. Can you please comment on Maine's position as it relates to Maine's residents impacted by security breaches?
Absolutely, Jimmy. So first is the law, since you started with the Attorney General. So Maine, like 47 other states, has dedicated breach notification law, and again, I just put it on the screen. So within 7 days, as long as it does not hinder investigation, notify the Attorney General, and if the breach is more than 1,000 individuals, we need to notify consumer reporting agencies. Next, please. Right. So from the citizen perspective, we need to be vigilant. Obviously, there is no escaping data breaches. And if anybody asks you for personally identifiable information, absolutely challenge them. Because and demand faster and better notification, and just in case things, you might want to consider personal insurance too, because things are really getting bad, especially after the Federal Office of Personnel Management breach. Next, please. And the usual user tips, do not divulge your password, do not use shared accounts, do not click on suspicious links, do not just walk out from your computer monitor without either locking it, all the usual things. It's just they assume greater importance in this day and age.
Thank you, Victor. I'd like you to share with us your perspective as a technical architect on what organizations must do to protect their data.
Absolutely. So let's next, please. So this is just a quick review of the kind of challenges we face in the state of Maine, which is really no different from any other large organization. I'm not going to read everything. Next, please. All right. So these numbers are important. So this is what we face. About 2.2 million intrusion attempts a day. 30,000 spam emails, and that's just the regular workday. And then there are the really big events we sometimes get hit with. So just to give a dimension of what we are facing. Next, please. And again, I've already talked about it. We strongly believe that architecture, security, and policy work together to really make the magic happen. Next, please. So again, we are very fortunate. We have a proactive governor who is a great friend of cybersecurity, and he has issued a couple of executive orders which are really relevant to cybersecurity, and we are thankful to him. Next, please. And we also have a rich partnership with universities, civil defense, emergency management, National Guard, because cybersecurity is so big that it's just impossible for any one party to take care of everything. So that's why we constructed this, and actively partner with everybody in this state. Next, please. So this is getting to the meat of it. So again,
hey, Victor, this is Jimmy. I'm just going to chime in real quick. We're getting a little bit of an echo, and I would just ask if all of our panelists make sure their phones are muted and make sure it's off on your computers, because we're getting a little bit of reverb when Victor it went away. So thank you for that, Victor. Please continue. We're going to pick up here with enterprise cybersecurity to do one. Thank you.
Thank you. So again, devices must be patched and hardened. No app or infrastructure deployed without security. The fleet must be centrally managed, unified policy, integrated identity and access management. You need a hardened perimeter. And in this day and age, when people bring in their own devices, again, it needs to be centrally managed, containerized, quarantined, and all that good stuff. Next, please.
By the pound or hash sign. If you do not have a PIN, just press pound.
I think somebody's trying to get in. But anyway, continuing with the to-do, it's really important to train users, annual cybersecurity training for users, static and dynamic encryption of personally identifiable information, employee transition. So this is when employees move, retire. There needs to be an immediate action in terms of disabling their access, and automated security information, event management, which, the proactive log analysis. And in this day and age, when we use cloud, demand audit, third-party audits from cloud providers. And I'm so glad Akamai is on this, because Akamai does this, which is the DOS protection. So all those things.
Victor, one last question for you. And again, I'm going to ask all the panelists, we're still getting a little bit of echo on today's broadcast, and our best just to kindly mute their computers and phones. There was a recent article in the Bangor Daily News that talks about a hacker group, and they used the Twitter handle VikingDome2015, and they claimed responsibility for not only taking down Maine.gov's website, but they also took down Visit New Hampshire's website. According to the article, Viking Dome was only able to briefly take down the site. Can you share with our team, with our audience nationally, how the state of Maine responded to this when Viking Dome tried to take down their site?
Absolutely. So, you know, Viking Dome is a textbook denial of service. So they have about a medium-sized zombie network. And I mean, in the scheme of things, they're a small to medium-sized player, and you know, so theirs was a textbook attack, and our response was textbook as well. So we proxied through our upstream ISP that provides a scalable bandwidth and aggressive traffic filtration. So the first week of the attack, we were not really prepared, so we were down for about 10 days. But after that, we wisened up, and I mean, it's been a non-event. And again, it's just an Akamai offers this service, and any number of other players offers this service. It's a standard service, which is you work with your ISP and get your perimeter surface as far away from your assets as possible.
All right. Thank you, Victor, with that. Last question for you, and I think this is something that everyone in our audience is dealing with. It's no longer a question of if, but when a state government organization will be attacked. What is your advice on how states should best prepare for future attacks?
Absolutely. So, Jim, you're absolutely, next slide, please. So, Jim, you're absolutely correct. It's not if, just when. So you need to counter paranoia with prudence. So first, harden the technology as much as possible, but it's not just about technology. So insist on user education, prepare the stakeholders from the C-suite down to the line workforce, and metrics are critical. The only way to justify investment is through better metrics. And finally, have a breach response plan and exercise it at least once a year.
Thank you for that, Victor. Those were some great answers to those questions. We're now going to switch over. Samantha Thomas, Chief Privacy Officer, Department of Correctional Health Care Services, State of California. Samantha, my first question for you, one of our listed forum topics includes the dilemma citizens have related to accessing government information, or rather securely accessing that information, whether it's electronic, paper, or even using technology to get through a live person. What is it that these problems really speak to? Could you please comment?
Certainly. Thank you, Jimmy. And my cough is gone. Thanks. I appreciate you speeding by my biography.
Yeah, and for those of you listening in around, I'm sorry, Samantha, I was going to say, for those of you listening in around the country, I'm in Northern California too. We have had it literally smells like a campfire outside. We've had a tremendous amount of fires out this way. Samantha, please continue.
Thank you. It's been awesome. So this is a very interesting question. I think the focus of federal, state, and local government tends to err on the side of being the most risk evasive, and to watch ourselves for the visits from the oversight agencies so we can be in compliance with the laws, rules, standards, and mandates for which we need to comply. Unfortunately, that leaves, I feel, a goodly part of who we are and what we do left to the ether, and that is to serve the citizens. So what are we doing to resolve this dilemma? Sounds like that's what the question is. I think we need to constantly revisit our focus. We talk a lot about securing apps and bringing in new systems. I love the fact that government in the last 10 years has become much more comfortable partnering with private industry. Along with CCHS, I've worked at CalPERS, CalSTRS, the DMV. No laughing, come on, folks. And I think the issue around providing access to me when I need it securely comes along with managing the different types of devices that are available not only in our nation but worldwide. We've got multiple devices, and there are solutions like Kaspersky and Trend Micro and others. Our sponsor has led the way in many avenues for us to have agility with the system that we invoke for federal, state, local, and provide us an opportunity to build security into it, not bolt it on. But I feel there is this lack of strategic interaction between how government and society react to each other. We need to strike a balance for how there is some social accountability and how that contributes to the governance equation for who we are in the security arena. People say, I need to be able to take my iPad, go to Montana, stand on a mountain, and get a copy of my most recent driving record. How do we serve that community? Do we need to? Can we outsource it? No. I don't have all those answers, but I think the dilemma can be resolved by us engaging the citizens a little bit more. Again, it's back to authorized access to secure information when I need it. And that gets back to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information as well, that old adage. How do we encourage our leaders who write this wonderful legislation that turns the law for which we have to comply to evolve with governance solutions that we can probably create with our citizens? Political regimes have, up on the left there's tyrannies, and to the right there's these deadlock regimes and coups. But somewhere in the middle, I think that's where North America is. We get this fantastic engagement from our citizens, from our communities, and some will give away their password for a cookie, and the others don't want the government to have any information about them. So it's an interesting question.
All right, thank you, Samantha. And folks, just a quick pause. For whatever reason today, we are having an echo gremlin that has come on this webinar, and I'm going to ask it to move on. If you could just kindly mute your computers or phones if you're not talking. Sometimes the reverb picks up, and it's affecting the webcast. So if you could kindly do that, mute your lines, I'd be much obliged. Our next question for Samantha Thomas, Chief Privacy Officer, Department of Correctional Healthcare Services. Samantha, what are some of your thoughts about how the United States and California government has been successful or not in collaborative creating and maintaining an information security-centric equation to specifically, what might our next steps be to proactively move our successes forward to mitigate future breakdowns and problems? Could you comment on that, Samantha?
Sure. I think the U.S. has been quite prudent in listening to its partnering nations, Canada, the EU. I work with, probably 15 different countries on their information security and privacy directives, and how I always ask the question, how's that working for you? And I think the U.S. waits for a few countries to pass laws, and I have observed this, and iron out their wrinkles. And then we jump on board, for instance, privacy initiative that came out of the EU, and I think it was Pan-Pacific about 4 years ago. So I think we've been successful in taking the lessons learned globally and applying them to areas like SOX and GLB and all those wonderful 4, 5, and 8 letter acronyms for federal, state, and local. The next steps, I always hear a lot of rumbling about budget and about resources. I know there's a meeting going on in Virginia right now with some very thought-provoking security leaders on how we can encourage our younger generation and people currently looking for work to be more engaged and inspire their passion for information protection. One of the things I'd like to turn on its head is improving the allocation of budget resources by incorporating the citizens' feedback on budget proposals. We don't do a lot of that with Assembly, the Legislature, or House of Representatives. And if we had more, a more efficient path, perhaps, and a more communicative and educational path for our citizens to understand how their monies, when put into the federal, state, or local budget, are funneled and exchanged, what percentage really does go into securing their information, to making sure it's accurate, to making sure it's available, to make sure it stays private and only shared with the people they want it to be shared with. I know a lot of people will not like my answer to this question, but I think it also speaks to the transparency of where our leadership needs to go, and again, provide some accountability back to the citizens. We have to improve targeting our social programs. The only way we're going to do that is to engage the communities for which we serve.
Thank you, Samantha. And as a citizen, I very much like the response to that question. We're now going to move over to Patrick Sullivan, Security Manager for Akamai. Patrick, a lot of people listening today may not realize this, but your company handles 20 to 30% of the world's web traffic. That's a huge number. Could you comment on what trends you are seeing with DDoS and big data throughout the country?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as you allude to, that's a tremendous amount of insight that we have across the public web, and obviously we see a lot of interesting things there. So, one of the interesting things we've seen sort of over the last 18 months was, I'm sure everybody will cringe at the mention of it, but when we saw Shell Shock be released, that was something that we had some advance warning about that just due to our position as critical infrastructure, and we were ready to protect customers as soon as that vulnerability was made public. So it was kind of gave us insight into just, how long does it take before there's a disclosure of a vulnerability until you start to see sort of scanning, right? So, we would see sort of the first day a couple of dozen, requests across our customer base looking to exploit that vulnerability. And it just was a hockey stick, right? By 7 days, we were seeing hundreds of thousands of web requests that were basically just scans, targeting applications, looking for vulnerabilities for Shell Shock. And it was interesting. I think every web application that's on the public internet is constantly being pen tested, right? Whether you're paying for it yourself or whether that pen testing is being done at no cost to you by some adversary somewhere. So we see scanning just taking place on a massive scale. And when we look at the data for Shell Shock, just because that one tends to be very interesting, we'll see on the order of 500,000 web requests that are, eliminating any false positives, just true positives, scanning for vulnerabilities there. And that can come from as few as a couple hundred IPs, right? So when we look from our vantage point across seeing so many of these sites, there are typically cloud-hosted servers that do nothing but scan websites across every vertical, every industry, looking for hits that they can achieve on that type of vulnerability, right? So that's probably the biggest trend we see there on the application security side, just massive scanning that takes place there. And then on the DDoS side, that's always an interesting topic for us. So I know Samantha mentioned kind of the a hopeful thought about the future generations and the youngsters. One of the things that we've seen with back to school this year is we've gotten quite a few calls, where we're seeing schools and other educational institutions that they're experiencing DDoS, right? And in some cases, we're able to trace that down and understand that, those DDoS attacks are being launched from, crime as a service, DDoS as a service, infrastructure that requires no skill, a very modest payment in Bitcoin. And we're even able to see cases where students in the classroom are generating those DDoS attacks, right? And that, again, all of the trends that we see across really every industry are true of education. Now having a very reliable web delivery for things like the statement of or the SOL test is really critical, and that becomes a compliance mandate for schools, right? So that's a critical event if some of that standardized testing is not being able to be delivered. So that's something that we see there. And then we see really on DDoS the return of extortion DDoS schemes. So we've seen really kind of picking up over the last 6 to 9 months, a notable campaign that you can easily Google DDoS for Bitcoin or DD4BC as an abbreviation. And there are adversaries that will essentially send a very small DDoS attack, follow that up with a ransom note, and say if you pay me X number of Bitcoins, I'll go away. Otherwise, I'll come back with a DDoS attack. And typically, they give about 24 hours notice. So that is keeping people busy, really across financial services, commerce. We're seeing that across a variety of industries, even some industries that are less likely to pay ransom, right? So typically, there are some verticals that sort of have a reputation for paying out ransom. And we're seeing the attackers move even beyond those to people that are less likely to pay there, which is somewhat unusual.
Patrick, could you comment briefly on us on what are the security implications of shadow IT?
Absolutely, great question. So this is a question that we get frequently. So one of the just for clarification, shadow IT, as I think most people are aware, is really the notion where rather than leveraging kind of the traditional IT team that frequently comes with some friction to the business, they have to fill out forms, they have to go work with their IT teams. We do see people now, consumers, just go directly to IT resources. So you could have somebody in marketing, for example, go directly to a cloud hosting provider and launch a website with a very easy to use CMS tool. So this is kind of, there's a lot of speculation in the security industry that this is leading to increased attack surface. And certainly, our research, in looking at where attackers are spending their time, really confirms that we see attackers sort of targeting some of the trends that you would associate with shadow IT. So for example, some of the very popular CMSs that are deployed have pretty good security just due to the number of eyes that are on those tools, and assuming that the person outside of IT is updating that CMS to keep up with the patches, they can still maintain things in a relatively safe stature. What becomes more difficult is the modular nature of some of those CMSs. They have plugins and themes that require nothing difficult, but an additional step on the part of the in this case, whoever's administrating that CMS. And I think the suspicion is that people are less likely outside of the disciplined IT team to go out there and take those additional steps to update some of those plugins or themes. So we see attackers spending a lot of time, and in our data we can see them poking at these plugins, right? So potential weak points as a result of shadow IT. So I heard a question.
No, I'm sorry, Patrick. I was just saying, just as a wrap-up question for us, could you share? We've talked about DDoS, big data, shadow IT. I know that you spent some of your career working for a government agency as well as in private industry. But what do you do if your agency data has been hacked? Can you share with us, some practical steps of what you can do?
Absolutely. So I think. The general methodology there is to immediately stop the bleeding, try to understand where the attack surfaced, and then kind of move down the steps of informing customers that if you have downstream customers that have been exposed, kind of go down that path.
All right, thank you, Patrick Sullivan, Security Manager from Akamai. We're now going to go over to Bill Britton, Director of Cybersecurity for CalPoly. Bill, in general, universities have a very different goal for security than private and public sector organizations, just by their nature. Universities want people to share, collaborate, research, and exchange ideas. Could you please comment on this?
Yeah, talk about all worlds colliding. That's exactly what we're experiencing. So we have a couple things we have to deal with that are very unique. We still have to follow all the rules and policies established by the government. There's no pass for being research-oriented. So we are connected to the world. We look into the world at large. We get email from the large, and yet we still have to protect our enterprise because we still have items, and we refer to as data that is sensitive data, very similar to PCI transactions, PII transactions. And so all of that is on the same network, under the same protection. And at the same time, you have a user group of professors and others who some help to design pieces and parts of the internet and truly believe in the individual nature, non-restrictive nature of what the internet should be. So you want to talk about BYOD. How about BYO network, BYON, where students show up and not having one device, but they may have as many as 10 different devices. They're hooking into the Wi-Fi, into the Ethernet per student. With 20,000 students and 10 network devices per, the numbers start to get staggering as to how to control that. And the idea then is that if you restrict their flow or their access for information, they can't do the research necessary to produce and go forward as a student and learn. And oh, by the way, let's not discount that small group of about 2,000 engineering computer science students we have who show up here knowing as much, if not more, about white hat hacking and file management than some of the professors, because they are just so advanced in their knowledge and state of understanding. So it's quite a unique problem set that we have to deal with, and it can't be done in the classic layered defense approach. Everything has to be a challenge, and everything is new and unusual every time we do it.
Thanks, Bill. CalPoly has an excellent reputation as a learning institute, as well as for the type of students they should produce. This is something I know personally. My son just started his junior year there. The next part, if you could just briefly, it's a three-part question, but I want to ask you this. What is your opinion on what future employers want, as well as what are the cutting-edge technologies they are looking for in students with a degree from CalPoly? And then I'd like you to answer why you all don't offer a degree in cybersecurity. So again, what are the employers looking for? What are the cutting-edge technologies that students are learning? And then CalPoly's position on not having a degree in cybersecurity. Could you comment?
Sure. First of all, the first question of what are future employers looking for? That's a great question that every professor at least CalPoly would love to have the answer to, so that we are providing our curriculum to answer the mail. The problem is, depending upon which community you're talking to, it's a different answer. So there is a forum, Business and Higher Education Forum, BHF, that I attended. And they actually had a panel to address this very specific question. And on the panel, they had a government representative, they had an industry representative, they had a government industry representative, as well as a commercial industry, and then they had an academic representative. And it was very interesting because each individual community has a different reference point on what they would like that student to look and feel like. So the professors and the other academic entities in the audience, their heads are spinning because they're trying to figure out, how do I answer the mail? I think the thing that becomes very interesting is that there is a degree of difference in that the industry partners really wanted hands-on experience, a knowledge base of practicum and critical thinking. Then the government entities really wanted experience in their specific world and specific problems. And then thirdly, what the academics were looking for was somebody who could really know those other areas to come and help them. So again, differing opinions and different cuts on everything. Now what we've done at CalPoly to kind of address that problem is that, you know, we can't write our curriculum to answer those three different areas. So what we try to do is to design what we call the 7 attributes of what a cybersecurity person should look like, so that they can be equipped with the right tools dependent upon the experience base. That's how you teach, train, and support those students. So at the cutting edge, what I think we've done is we've really addressed this from a 2-part equation. And the cutting edge is that we've added a social element to the curriculum as well as upgrading the curriculum. So it's not just about what they learn in the engineering class and computer science class, but also then how they correlate that to their social experience. CalPoly has a motto, logo of learn by doing. And again, what we're trying to do is to expose our students, particularly in cybersecurity, to what we call 4 lanes of delivery, which is the core program, the elective programs, the social experiences they have, and real-world exposure. And it's that social and real world where we can really make a difference to help that student understand what the employment world is looking for, and also give them kind of a social, ethical approach in how they're interacting with cybersecurity as they go forward. So in that context, what we've done is we did a very similar discussion and analysis the intelligence community did when it came to how do we increase the number of intelligence analysts that we create in the world. And one of the things we found is when you create an intelligence analyst who only knows that skill set, they don't bring to the table the other critical thinking skills from other variant areas that really makes that analyst that much better. So we've kind of seen the same thing in cybersecurity, in that there are multiple programs developing cybersecurity programs that only teach cybersecurity, but they don't teach business, they don't teach learning. And again, the attributes we're finding that employers really need for that next generation of leadership is people who can communicate, who can do risk analysis, who can do reverse engineering and systems integration, so that they can help answer problems not as a solution, but as an architectural response to what's really going on. And so in that capacity, what we're trying to do is to add those 7 attributes to all of the engineering skill sets, that that person in their career area can be a cybersecurity person with those skill sets, but not have to go through a cybersecurity degree to achieve them.
Thank you, Bill. Last question for you, and this is a question that's really impacted many of the people that are listening in today in higher education. Over the last year, many universities have been hacked by ghost shell. Particularly many of the schools in the California university system, as well as around the nation, have been hacked by ghost shell to expose weaknesses in their cybersecurity policies. Could you comment on this trend, as well as how governance of security policy should take place at any university?
Well, there was an article recently I read, which was, I don't know if it was insightful or harrowing. I haven't figured it out, but it says 2015, year of the university breach and hack. That's not a comforting feeling that it's making the headlines and is sufficient material for an article. I think part of the challenge that you have is, again, is the fact that, in particular, CalPoly is a publicly based university. Therefore, we follow state guidance, federal guidance, all these different guidances. But the guidances that really aren't built around an education research basis. So we have a difficulty in applying these governances, and it's really taken an extra amount of time to understand them and then explain them. So it's great to write the policy. It's great to have these guidelines. But you have to get the individual users to understand that the world that they come from, which is open, accessible research, has limits on it. I mean, that almost doesn't make sense. And so again, it becomes where you have to be able to explain to people why there are, in fact, limitations on what that means and how it operates. We still have a lot of professors here who would rather use their own personal computer and plug it into the enterprise and download information and apps on a daily basis. But when you do that, your enterprise is at risk. So we really are struggling with that entire perspective of governance over an open academic environment. And I think the biggest key becomes then the communication aspect, which we believe is a critical component of being a person in cybersecurity, is to correctly articulate why certain things just can't be open-ended, open-looped, and what happens if you do.
All right, thank you, Bill. I just want to take a quick pause. This webinar has been scheduled for an hour. The audience that has come in nationally is still with us. We have a very strong following. We're probably going to go a few minutes over today. We have a couple more guests that we want to interview. We've had a multitude of questions come in from registration. I know some of our panelists do have to leave at the top of the hour, but I'm going to ask our guests if you'll hold on for a few minutes after the hour. I have a few questions for Randell, Bob, and Jim, and we'll get through those, and we'll try to get to a couple of the audience's questions. And as I mentioned, what we can't get to in the webinar time, we will certainly follow up with you, but I think we're going to go a little bit past 11. Now, I'd like to bring on Randell Smith, Chief Information Security Officer and Chief Privacy Officer for the City of Phoenix, Arizona. Randell, as the CISO, you host many lunch and learn sessions for employees and citizens on security. Your sessions this year have been on topics such as data privacy, cybersecurity, cyber scams, fraud, and the Russian crime rings. Could you share with our audience how the City of Phoenix has responded to these sessions?
Now, Jimmy, I'll be mindful of our time and abbreviate some of my comments. Be happy to talk about it later if we have time. But we've actually had very good response and participation in our sessions. I think the reason we're doing that and being successful is that we try to make all of our cyber presentations very relevant and actionable information to our attendees. In other words, we actually do a lot of discussions around how to use social media securely, how to recognize phishing and other cyber scams, what steps do you need to take to avoid to become a victim of identity theft, and how to stop and identify cyberbullying, and so on. We also talk about the latest cyber threats, such as ransomware on PCs, and now that's going to mobile devices, as well as the vulnerabilities such as Certificate, which affects many new Android devices. Additionally, my staff and I spend a lot of time with our new employee orientation training classes talking about cybersecurity and privacy. The goal is to educate their new employees about who to contact in the event of a cyber event and where to find the city's security and privacy policies. And nowadays, we spend a lot of time in the area of teaching employees how to recognize phishing attacks. Back to you.
Thank you, Randell. In addition to working for the city of Phoenix, you also were a cryptologist with the Navy for 30 years, as you mentioned in your introduction. Please share with us a success story of what's working well in the city of Phoenix regarding security right now.
Well, the challenge that I face as a CISO, and even my peers do, is that technology and threats are constantly evolving. Just trying to keep up with unified threat management, BYOD, identity access management, next generation firewalls, incident response preparation, detection, recovery is more than just a handful. When you add in continuous security awareness training, penetration risk assessments, network hardening, compliance, contract remediation, negotiation, it seems almost overwhelming. But even as the hackers are getting better in crafting new forms of malware, we actually are getting better in forming real partnerships, both formal and informal, with our peers in both public and private industry. We cannot do this alone. In Phoenix, we created the Valley Information Security Exchange, or VICE Group, which is an informal partnership of information security managers from most of our sister cities, the county and state. We meet quarterly to share and discuss cyber issues affecting local and state government. Additionally, we partner with the FBI, Homeland Security, and the MSISAC and actively share real-time log and threat information. Okay, back to you again.
Thank you, Randell. Last question for you. Last October, hackers attacked the City of Phoenix internet system. Fox News reported that hackers were trying to breach sensitive information from police servers. Please comment on this attack. And I know that you've put together some information for us to look at, but could you comment on that attack?
I will indeed. The slides you'll see real briefly on the screen, I'll go through those in just a minute, talk about one of the takeaways from the attack was that you have to have a active cybersecurity incident communication plan well before the attack starts. Talk about that in just a minute. The cyber attacks which targeted the city of Phoenix last fall was truly a wake-up call for our executive leadership, understanding that there was a real threat to cyber criminals and hacktivists posing to municipal government. As reported by Fox News, the city of Phoenix intermittently lost internet access for approximately 3 hours back in October. The event temporarily impacted our Phoenix Police Department's mobile data computers, which were located in the officer squad cars. Now, it did not affect their radios, which are the primary communications, but they did impact their ability to respond to crime events, which was somewhat degraded by the attack. Well, the cause of the outage was a distributed denial of service attack, which flooded our internet routers with over thousands of communication requests, stopping any legitimate traffic from getting through. Now, our intrusion protection systems immediately kicked in and blocked both incoming and outgoing traffic to ensure that malicious actors did not penetrate our firewalls. The most successful outcome of this event was the creation of a new executive-level cybersecurity incident command team with representation from police, fire, emergency management, communications, legal, and information technology services. The city recognized that there was information silos that separated both public safety, our police, fire, and emergency management from ITS. We implemented new services such as DDoS prevention and 24/7 threat detection. Additionally, we integrated the city's cyber components and resources into the National Incident Management System, which is spearheaded by Emergency Management Department. In hindsight, it was actually very fortunate we were attacked in the fall, because if we had not been attacked, we would not have realized the number of cybersecurity gaps which we had, which would have made us much less prepared for our role in the Super Bowl 2015, where we played a very active role in monitoring and observing that from a cyber standpoint. So we had a lot of successes there, and I can go on, but I do want to be mindful of the time.
Well, no, you're very kind, and I'm sorry. You know, we're going to continue. I know that Jim Bates has a hard stop and Bob Woolley at the top of the hour, and we're going to stay on for a little bit extra. Our audience is still staying in with us and have sent messages and that they'd like us to continue. Bob, I know that you have a hard stop at the top of the hour as well as Jim Bates, and I'd like to get a question out to each of you in the time that we have. But, you know, one of the things I'd like to ask you, Bob, it's kind of a two-part question, is, you know, how IT organizations and the CIO act as a broker for security services. I'd like you to comment on that as well as the role as enterprise architecture and security. Bob?
Okay. I don't have a hard stop, by the way, anymore, so I'm okay.
Okay.
As far as the IT organization, the CIO act as a broker, one of the things that we do, and you need to understand our environment a little bit because a lot of states are similar. Every application that we release has to be accessible. It has to be platform independent. It has to be browser independent, and it has to be secure. That's bad enough. So what we try to do is we try to work with agencies, and we focus heavily on risk. We're highly centralized, so we have fairly good policy and process controls. But as you look at state organizations, success with security is based upon platform, process, policy, people. I think you can figure out where there are breakdowns. In most state organizations, processes sometimes tend not to be as strong, and that can be an issue. So what we try to do is talk with the agencies and really understand what their needs are. What does your risk look like? What do we need to really guard against on a high priority basis? So we try to work with the business very closely, and that's been fairly effective.
Thank you, Bob. Bob, I want to come back to you in a minute. Jim, I know that you have a hard stop. I just got your note on the board, and that you have to leave right at the top of the hour, which we're approaching. Do you have time for just one quick question for us before you move on to your next meeting?
Yes, I can take a question.
Okay, I'll do a quick one. This is probably one of the more interesting questions. Jim, and again, sorry we're running a little bit late. We're going to go over. I know you have a hard stop. Jim is the CIO for the state of Alaska. Jim, this was one of the most fascinating things that I've recently learned about. But why is the Arctic such a big focus for the state of Alaska as well as the White House? Can you share with us how the Arctic is a security threat to your state?
Sure, Jimmy. I don't know if you got the slides or not. If not, I can go without them. But the Arctic is a big focus for several reasons. One, even though it's maybe kind of a joke from the Sarah Palin governorship, but our proximity to Russia. I had a picture of a map of Alaska that shows really how close we are to Russia. Also, there's other interests in the Arctic region for climate change reasons. You know, we just had President Obama have a visit up here. He went above the Arctic Circle to Kotzebue. Climate change, as other scientific NOAA's had a big study on the ice breakup and its impact to wildlife. And then there's also just a lot of natural resources in the area, oil and gas. So there's a lot of different motivating factors. We, United States, just took over as the lead role for the Arctic nations, which kind of switches out every so often. And so, I helped prepare a report to the White House last December for NTIA. And there's been ships, even when President Obama was here, there was Russian or Chinese warships up there in the Arctic. So, it's definitely, one of the things that we've been looking at. What are these criminals after? It depends really on the nation states, the mafia, the crime rings, the hacktivists. Some are curious. Some are driven by monetary gains, and others are more nefarious. They want to understand infrastructure strategically. We've had we get about 2.5 billion hits on our .gov space every month. That's 2.5 billion with a B. And out of those 2.5 billion, about 600 become incidents that we actually have to track. And we've had, in my 2.5-year tenure here at the state, those that we've had, we work with the Homeland Security and FBI and all the three-letter agencies in regard to not only our state security, but national security. And, some of these are where they're looking for infrastructure. They want intellectual property. They want to understand our state and its roads and bridges and our oil pipeline and, things that are national assets. And so, we have a huge state. It stretches, if you put the what we call the panhandle where Capital Juneau is at, into Florida, the Aleutian chain would hit California. And the top of Alaska would be up in the Great Lakes, and the bottom would hit the top of Texas. So, we have a massive amount of land, and we have government agencies that are doing services in those remote areas, and we're trying, to hook them up securely with our wide area network and manage, all the endpoints and, security detection and how we prevent security events and how we respond to them, how we do training and awareness, and, all the vulnerability scanning and everything that has to happen. And it makes it really a challenge when we have such a broad area to cover. And so hopefully that helps answer the question.
Jim, thank you. I know that you've got to run. There were a couple other questions, and what we'll do is we'll have all that out in the on-demand version, but I appreciate you sharing that with us and taking time to join us. Before we get started, I know much of our audience is staying along with it. I just wanted to have one more question out to Bob Woolley, who's the Chief Technical Architect with the state of Utah. Bob, could you comment how enterprise architecture should be leveraged to drive a government cybersecurity strategy?
Well, we're heavily involved with writing the security strategy and putting the process pieces together for the state. But I think one of the big issues is enterprise architecture needs to realize that security just isn't the same anymore. I mean, we spend much more time looking at behavioral analytics than we do endpoint protection schemes. We have to look at ways to encrypt and decrypt data at rest and in transit, things that we didn't worry about as much a number of years ago. So I think EA just needs to simply be sensitive to the fact that the risk landscape is changing all the time, and that those changes need to be communicated to stakeholders so that they also understand. We do things now with code testing of applications that weren't done frequently years ago. Everything that's deployed on the web has security code testing. So we leverage the system development lifecycle very differently than we would have years ago. And many of our partners require it. So that we audit for those kinds of issues.
Thank you very much for that. Folks, we are right at the top of the hour, and we've had a numerous amount of questions. The feedback from our panelists has been wonderful. We're right at the top of the hour. We have a handful of questions coming in. I know our speakers can stay on for just a few more minutes, and then we're going to need to adjourn. So I'm thinking everyone in the audience is still hanging in there with us. We're going to go for just a few more minutes. Questions we cannot answer in today's webcast, we'll certainly get back to you. But one of the questions that I have for the panel going out there is, you know, one of the big things to think about is amongst the plethora of solutions, what are you looking for in your next type of security solutions, the next generation? What are you looking for to protect the data of your government? Please comment. And Victor, I don't know if you want to chime in on that.
Sure, Jim. One of the things right now in Maine, we are really concentrating on the so-called SAM, Security Incident and Event Manager. And, you know, that's by no means the only thing, but that's our next big thing that we are chasing, just up our game in security incident and event management.
Thank you, Victor. Would anyone else on the panel like to comment on that question?
Yeah, Bob Woolley, we're also putting quite a bit of effort into a Splunk environment. Again, behavioral analytics, trying to understand the threats in real time as they come across. And there are millions of them per day. It's been extraordinarily valuable.
Excellent. Thank you, Bob. Anyone else care to comment on that?
I think, Jimmy, this is Bill Britton. I think one of the things that we need to do, we're trying to address, again, at the academic level is we would like to see more correlation between risk management and engineering technology solutions. And I think if the user communities could really help us identify how they would like to see risk management taught and the philosophy behind it, that would be really helpful from our perspective.
Okay. Anyone else care to comment? We're just going to try to squeeze in one other question here. If there are any other comments, I have one other comment, and I'd like to push this one towards Akamai and then as well as some of our people. But what happens when an enemy, say, of the United States gets access to government data? I mean, we've watched this last year from you know, Russian crime groups getting access to North Carolina's data for over 500 hours. You know, Utah has had some challenges. California, of course, you know, we all read the recent audit report. But what happens when groups get a hold of private data? We're in this era now where a health record is far more valuable than someone's credit card information. Patrick, care to comment? Okay, any of our other panelists care to comment?
Sure, Jim, this is Victor.
Hi, Jim.
Thank you. Please.
Victor, do you want to go ahead then, Samantha? Go ahead,
sure.
Victor.
Yeah, I mean, this pretty much yesterday's news is as part of the Federal Office of Personnel Management breach, about 6 million fingerprint might have been exfiltrated. And it's, you know, even though the government has not come out, it's the word on the street is, you know, this is an enemy country of the United States, has that data, and it's deadly. And I mean, because this impacts, you know, because the way this data is relevant for people who went through security clearance. So the impact of an enemy nation having our data, especially biometric, is truly mind-boggling. And thank you for bringing this question to the fore. And frankly, I don't think there has been the kind of attention paid to this topic that it deserves.
Samantha, you were going to say something on that.
Yeah, I was just going to say what happens, those two words, it's a very broad question. Lots of things happen. So I'm uncertain about the context, but I think, you know, we often go to the area of, well, all these bad things can happen. We need to ensure that our gates are closed and the walls are up, and that's true. But I think, you know, on the flip side, what also happens is it creates some synergy between other countries, the United States, and, you know, globally. I think it helps pull together people like your panelists and others who want to do the right thing and realize that sometimes doing the right thing means we're going to have to reach across the water to people that are also trying to do the right thing and get this done together. It's going to be difficult for different three-letter agencies in different countries to try to do this alone. And there are lots of partnerships that have been going on, particularly in the last 10 or 15 years, and I've been involved with them. But the last 2 years, we've seen a real turn of tide, and a lot of it has evolved from Eastern Bloc, North Korea, and countries are getting nervous. So I think silver lining, what happens when an enemy of the U.S. gets access to government data is that it helps governments have an edge to dig their heels in and re-examine their standards and reach out to their Congress and their leadership and their parliamentary members and their ministries of defense and say, this is no joke. So there's a silver lining to that as well.
Thank you, Samantha.
About Woolley.
Yeah, please, Bob.
As we've looked at breaches, some of the things that look like breaches and theft of data turn out to be nothing but very sophisticated DDoS attacks, which is kind of interesting in and of itself. When we look at where we have failures from time to time, in almost every case, it's a breach of process on our end. That's an interesting message, because I think if we want to be really good keeping people out of places they shouldn't be, we really do have to have process discipline. Without it, it doesn't work much. A fool with a tool is still a fool.
That's an excellent point. That very much is. Would anyone else on the panel like to comment on that question?
This is Randell. I'll make one final comment here, is that I agree with Samantha. There's a silver lining in the fact that with all these cyber attacks and breaches you see daily in the paper and the news, that it's finally raising the level of awareness to our CEOs and executive leadership that we have to move forward in this world. We have to increase our partnerships and collaborate and communicate among those who are security practitioners, whether state or private organizations, because the bad guys are doing it all the time. So we are getting better, but it's like it's a tough time right now, and we have to do a lot in our area to educate the end users on how to use their devices more securely.
Thank you, Randell. We are right at 10 after the hour. I want to thank you, the audience, who have stayed with us. I think we almost could do another webinar to answer. We had just a multitude of questions come in from online as well as through the dashboard, and we'll try to get back to those outside of this session. I'd like to say thank you to our panelists. You were wonderful, insightful, riveting, and just a joy to have on today's call. A special thanks to our sponsor, Akamai. I would ask you all to kindly take a few minutes to fill out the survey. It's very important for me. Also, a on-demand version of today's webinar. I'll send you a YouTube link where you can watch back some of the information. If you'd like to have more information about our sponsor, Akamai, there's some information on your screen right now. Also, If you would like more information about the Public Sector Technology Exchange, my contact information is there. On behalf of the Public Sector Technology Exchange, thank you for attending Extortionists, Exfiltrators, and Hacktivists. Make it a great day.